19th century and early part of the 20th century, general strikes by workers and insurrections led by armed forces, insurgent armed forces, were the phenomenological form of these uprisings. But in the later part of the 20th century, we have a new phenomenon that appears. It's been called many things. People power is probably its most common. The Eros Effect refers to these moments when thousands or even millions of people surge into the streets and refuse to leave to return to their everyday lives until significant shifts are made in the social order. These moments accomplish in days what history takes years and even decades to accomplish, and they're enormously significant in understanding the essential character of society and how change can be put forth. I first developed the concept of the Eros Effect doing research about the movements of 1968, and I saw how in every country where there were movements, these movements were related to each other, much more than they were related to specific national conditions.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people. You will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
Since my understanding of the Eros Effect was developed, when I turned my attention to East Asia, I made a startling discovery. That was, in the 1980s, there was a string of uprisings for democracy and increased freedom that were related to each other. In 1980, the Gwangju Uprising was suppressed, but 7 years later, the June Uprising overthrew the military dictatorship. The next year, in Burma, we had an uprising which saw 10,000 people or more massacred, but which nonetheless indicated the Burmese people's desire for freedom. In 1989 in Tibet and in China, there were movements for freedom and democracy. In 1990 in Nepal, in 1992 in Thailand, and in many other countries in East Asia. It seems to me that the movements of that same time period in Eastern Europe against Soviet domination have been much more analyzed and were articulated much more as elite-led transformations than those in East Asia, which clearly came from millions of ordinary people acting together from the grassroots. In these moments of the Eros Effect, the popular reality is reconstructed by thousands of people who change their everyday lives. Instead of values like patriotism, hierarchy, or competition being the dominant values, people construct new values of solidarity, of humanity, of love for each other. And these moments are very rare in history, but they offer essential glimpses into the character of society. In Burma in 1988, the reality of the liberated city, of people loving each other, of Buddhist monks marching alongside Christians and pagans, has some meaning that transcends history. The given structures of the society are shoved aside and new values are created that reflect the human core of the social order. Gwangju 1980 was an example of people overthrowing the military dictatorship through their own efforts. They formed an army within hours of the military opening fire on them, and they were able to drive the military out of the city, hold the city, and care for each other. Crime essentially vanished. The police now worked for the liberated city, and the military could do nothing in the face of the mobilized power of the people. This moment is unique in Korea, But we see it in other societies in a very similar way, that people take power through their own efforts and actions. The sacrifices that happen when people make these changes, these leaps in historical evolution, are enormous. People are killed, people are maimed, people are brutalized, and yet at the same moment, people make tremendous progress in realizing freedom. Freedom is never simply a given state. It's something that continually has to be redefined and struggled for. So in these struggles for freedom, we see the essential character of human beings, of the ways in which society can be redeveloped by human imagination and human willpower. Normally, we think of Eros as a bond between two people, particularly people who are in love. And yet in these moments of the Eros effect, we're talking about many people, thousands of people coming together and creating new values, new norms, so that relations among human beings have a very different quality and a different feel to them. These moments are considered moments of madness by mainstream sociologists. And yet, when we look at them from the bottom, from the point of view of ordinary people, these are moments of freedom, of liberation, when leaders, dictators, are unable to control the love of people for each other. Essentially, these moments of the Eros effect indicate that ordinary people acting together by the millions have a far greater intelligence than the elites that run society. Ordinary people acting together, for instance, do not make wars. They do not have people starving while other people are well fed. These examples of ordinary people taking power into their own hands are an indication of how human society could be structured permanently if we can deal with the problems of the elite domination of economic and political institutions and resolve the question of what is the purpose of human life in a way that says our purpose on this planet is to enhance all forms of life. From the cultural political movements of the 1960s to the popular uprisings in East Asia in the 1980s and 1990s, we see today, at the beginning of the 21st century, vibrant popular movements in Latin America that challenge the structures of everyday life in economics, in politics, and forms of cultural oppression. These movements were spurred by the Zapatistas' call for an uprising against neoliberalism. In Seattle in 1999, as in many other places in the world before then and since, thousands of people have confronted the summits of the elites that dominate the world. We can hope today that the integration of all these various movements in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, and in all parts of the world could one day come together for a global uprising against neoliberalism, against a system that keeps 1 billion people at the very verge of starvation and a few with billions of dollars in their pockets. There is no logical or rational reason why the current situation must continue. We, millions of us all over the world, can effectively change the way the world is organized and create a free society for the first time in history.